How did you learn about climate change? How much did your school teach you? Maybe climate education isn't available to everyone in your country. Or maybe it wasn't ever compulsory, so you just never cared. Hopefully, by the end of my speech, these are the very topics that you will be left thinking about. Hello, my name is Aishwarya Puttur and I am an Indian-Canadian youth climate activist. Before I continue, I think it's fair to give an introduction to what climate education is all about. In simple words, climate education is educating people about the current climate crisis we're facing. It helps us understand and address the impacts climate change has on the environment, people, wildlife, and economy. So the question here is, why do I need climate education? Why is it required? Everyone deserves the right to know about one of humanity's most disastrous crises. The climate crisis is upon us now, and we are facing the impacts, not just in some future world, but in this exact moment. If not now, when will we start teaching about climate change? Natural disasters across the world are occurring, caused by global warming, yet many people don't know why. The most recent ones were due to climate change. And the people impacted by those disasters need to know the cause in order to work towards a solution. Let's break it down to the core now. Education. Some may say school's a prison, while others may like it. At the end of the day, education is a tool for children to learn essential topics and skills that they will need in their life to make informed decisions as a citizen and as a human being. The climate crisis should be included in that too. We need to make sure that our generation and the next generation of children grow up being very aware of every decision that both they and the system makes and how these decisions affect the environment and its people. If we teach children about this crisis and spark hope within them that they can create change, then that change will truly happen. Our generation is unique and special because we're one of the first generations to face the impacts of climate change, yet one of the last to make a difference. That means that we have the power to create future leaders and change makers right in our hands. Those who will carve the path to a world which is run by renewable green energy, a world where everyone believes in science, a world in which not only is climate change tackled, but all of the intersectionalities of it. Racial, social, and gender problems. With climate education, people will start doing everyday activities in harmony with nature. They will question the government and come up with solutions, therefore becoming change makers. It empowers everyone, especially young people, to take action. Now, people may say, why don't we put all of that money, energy, and effort into actual climate action? Good point. Except climate education is a part of climate action. Spreading awareness is one of the first steps for any issue. When we address and educate people about huge issues like climate change, we open their minds to the climate crisis and climate action. Those thoughts are going to stay in their minds. They will bring something to the table, and that's exactly what we need. The more people we educate, the more people contribute. The fact, do you believe in climate change is a political question, is baffling. At this point, when we only have a few years left to take actual climate action before the climate crisis becomes even more irreversible, we cannot afford people debating about a crisis that decides the fate of our planet, people, and wildlife. For example, think about biology class, and when you learn about human anatomy, does anyone ever go, but is it really real? Like, do I actually have a heart that pumps blood? I mean, seems bizarre to me. No one ever does that. If you do, you might want to hit the books again. Anyway, moral of the story, no one ever does that because we are taught from a very young age that we have a heart inside our body, pumps blood, voila. Climate change should be taught like any other subject because it is as important as them. If climate change is taught just like any other subject, everyone will then believe, understand, and implement. The world will not just believe in science, but understand it. We see evidence every day. We see the numbers increasing. It should not be a debate at this point. All right, let's now talk about the current climate education around the world. Climate change education, also known as CCE, is a privilege. There's no doubt about it. It shouldn't be one, but it is. The climate education a person receives really varies in many aspects. Where they live, their educational systems, their curriculums, teachers, government institutions, etc. But at the end of the day, climate education is still a privilege. Believe me when I say this. Most of the activists I know have learned more about climate change through articles, the internet, books, and other resources than through their schools. Now that says a lot. To have to learn at such a young age about humanity's 6th mass extinction from resources off the internet instead of your school because they just decided to just brush off some facts. Honestly, it's even more frightening. Learning from external resources is also a privilege which not everyone has. Not everyone has Wi-Fi or internet connections, or even a community to talk and educate each other about these issues, or maybe even a library. According to a study conducted by researchers from the Lakehead University in Canada, along with an organization called Learning for a Sustainable Future, only 51% of Canadians feel well informed about climate change, while 43% failed a climate knowledge test. The study overall found that 86% of Canadians felt that they do need more information about climate change, and that climate change is mostly taught through science-related subjects followed by the social sciences. For only 1 to 10 hours per semester, or get this, even per year. Those numbers are absolutely staggering. How much do you think a teacher can actually teach and cover in 1 to 10 hours? What about the fact that basically only half of the Canadians in Canada feel well informed about a crisis that is looming over all of us and will decide our fate? Of course, those statistics are specific to Canada, and every country has its own, which I cannot go listing, otherwise this speech would go on forever. However, they do reflect how our current climate education status is and how much it is needed. Some places have a chapter on climate change in their science or geography class. Others may include it when they're talking about the environment, and some don't even touch on the topic. Now, when it comes to the implementation of climate change education, there are many things that need to be considered. Climate change is not standardized, and that is the problem. Italy became the first country to make climate education compulsory back in 2019. We gotta start somewhere, and that's great, but let's implement this everywhere. It's not like we don't have the resources to implement resourceful and beneficial climate change education. We do, but our governments are not doing it. There are so many organizations, including grassroots groups out there, who have developed country-specific curriculums for climate change education that can be implemented. Even UNESCO developed a program called ESD, or Education for Sustainable Development. They work with various national governments to integrate climate education into their national curricula. Now, they have developed recommendations for policymakers on how to integrate CCE, climate change education, and ESD, education for sustainable development into a country's national curriculum. Those include policy development, governance and resources, meaning there should be high-level support from the government and coordination from the government. Curriculum development, having CCE and ESD featured at all levels of the education system, capacity building for teachers and educational planners, and finally, public awareness, communication, and stakeholder involvement. Education for all is a human right, and education about a crisis that affects each and every one of us is also a right. Climate change education should no longer be a privilege, but rather something that is available to all. One that includes the intersectionalities of the climate crisis, states scientific facts as it is, has frontline defenders and marginalized people's voices heard, and explains how we can make sustainable changes and take action. Not just individual ones, but also systemic. All I ever learned at school was what global warming is, how it's caused, the greenhouse effect, and what we can do about it. Individual actions such as the 3 R's, reducing, reusing, and recycling, the regular. I know that sounds like everything climate related was covered, but in reality, there's a lot more to know. I completely acknowledge that I have privileges that allowed me to at least learn that much from my school, but that should not be the bare minimum. What about the existential threat climate change imposes on our world, its impacts, systemic involvement? Because we are never going to stop the climate crisis by just recycling alone. That's not going to happen. Climate justice, its intersectionalities, how it affects the marginalized communities the most, even though they contribute the least towards global emissions. There's so much more we can be doing to teach our children about the climate crisis, especially when the only CCE I did undergo was brushed over in a very brief science lesson. I learned how climate change is a crisis and its terrible impacts only through the internet, social media, by talking to people, and by attending webinars and conferences. I got involved with activism through fear. The fear that I soon won't be able to live in a world in which I can breathe in, a world my future generations will be swimming through due to the excessive sea level rise, a world with no more fauna or flora. As time went on, my fear became hope, as I saw all these other passionate activists and scientists who were willing to fight for our planet just like me. No person should have to go through fear like that, but almost every person who cares for the environment does. Thomas Isaac, a high school science teacher, decided to do an experiment one day on the group of students he was teaching. He took surveys before and after teaching about climate change throughout the entire year. His experiment showed that students felt less distressed about their future after going through climate change education because they finally understood it, even though they weren't exactly the most enthusiastic for the future, which honestly makes sense. I mean, it would be. But the results also proved that the students now felt a bigger call to action, which is exactly what we need. We need to educate people so they won't have to go through articles and learn on their own of the shocking details about our planet's present and future. We need to educate them in a way that will ignite their passion to take climate action. We need to educate them in a way that they will have hope for the future of our world. Finally, I'd like to conclude my speech by saying the world and its people deserve to know, understand, and implement climate action about a crisis that will seal humankind's fate forever. So y'all better start working. Thank you so much for listening, and thank you to the entire Mock COP team for hosting and giving us all this opportunity to further educate ourselves. Goodbye.